Chapter 467 Star Anise Omnithrust, Volume 34. A 20,000 men army was already considered rather large. Nan Kikai's estimation was accurate. After Hua Yua used his spiritual detection to scan the place, he could basically confirm that the size of the army was between 20 to 25,000 men. He continued to advance further in. He moved his way past the tents at the perimeter and got closer to the dark red tents. At the same time, he strengthened his spiritual detection and sensed any changes that could occur around him. If this were an ordinary army, they couldn't possibly threaten Hua Yua. However, things were different with the presence of the Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion. There had to be a Class 9 Soul Engineer in this Soul Engineer Legion. Furthermore, the strategy of such an advanced tier Soul Engineer Legion could threaten a titled Douluo, much less Hua Yua. This was why he had to be careful. As he moved forward, he discovered through his spiritual detection that there was a huge tent in the center of all the tents. It was also dark red, but it was as large as the commander's tent. There were even obvious golden phoenix images on it. It was extremely crowded inside this tent. What left Hua Yua the most shocked was that he sensed something wrong just as his spiritual detection came closer to the tent. He immediately stopped his detection. This was because he discovered spiritual barrier around it. If not for the fact that he had just formed his soul core, and the sensitivity of his spiritual detection had increased significantly, he wouldn't have discovered the presence of this spiritual barrier. If he had tried to probe further in, he would have likely been discovered. No wonder it was a Beast Lord ranked Soul Engineer Legion. The defense of the commander's tent was extremely tight. There was even a spiritual barrier around it. Hua Yua was naturally not disappointed because of that. He silently inched forward and came closer and closer to the tent. It was only by getting close to it could he obtain the most reliable information. At the same time, his spiritual power also entered the rest of the other tents for detection purposes. The members of this Soul Engineer Legion were indeed all female Soul Engineers. Furthermore, their cultivations were quite strong too. They all possessed at least 4 soul rings. Some of them even possessed 5 or 6 soul rings. In the slightly bigger dark red tents, there were even 7 ring soul engineers. Such soul engineers were considered quite strong. As he inched forward, Hua Yua circumvented a few more isolation detectors. Finally, he stopped 30 meters away from that huge tent. This was the furthest he could go, given the presence of the spiritual barrier. If he moved any further forward, he would most certainly be discovered. I can't go any closer, or I'll be discovered. However, I can't get any reliable information if I don't get closer. Hua Yua furrowed his brow. He found a corner and squatted down. At the same time, he unleashed his spiritual detection laterally around the commander's tent. He was trying to survey everything that was going around the tent, and waiting for his opportunity. The black soul core of his eye of destiny suddenly appeared. His aura of destiny spread out, and Hua Yua shut his eyes. He sensed everything silently. Given the standard of his current spiritual power, almost the entire base was engulfed by his spiritual power apart from the commander's tent. He was definitely more effective than the aerial surveillance soul tools in the sky. However, Hua Yua's expression soon turned weird. The members of this Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion were all females. It was already very late. Some of the female soul engineers toned down on their dressing after dinner. Hua Yua's spiritual detection was all engulfing. When the images of countless females dressed rather lightly entered his spiritual world, Hua Yua felt as if he were about to go crazy. After his expression turned momentarily weird, he started to blush. After this, he frantically retracted his spiritual detection. He only kept it in the air, stopped surveilling the conditions inside the tents. Hua Yua heaved a sigh of relief when he could no longer sense their bodies. He continued to look towards the commander's tent and silently waited for his opportunity. Although there was a spiritual barrier blocking him here, he didn't believe that he didn't stand a chance at all. Dim lights flashed, and Hua Yua revealed an icy cold look in his eyes. As he silently waited, he was also observing things. Very soon, his opportunity arrived. A few female soul engineers dressed in red armor walked towards the commander's tent. Their armor was well fitted. Evidently, it was top quality. Every one of their suits of armor was custom made. There were even buckle-like accessories and slots on them. Obviously, these slots were used to connect to different soul tools. Although these female soul engineers weren't particularly ravishing, they still looked like suave heroines. Very soon, they arrived in front of the commander's tent. Unlike what Hua Yua had feared, they walked through the spiritual barrier and into the tent as if there were nothing there. Hua Yua's spiritual power had engulfed everywhere else nearby. This was why he had an acute feeling of everything around him. He immediately discovered a layer of light shining from each of their bodies when they passed through the spiritual barrier. These layers of light were extremely weak, but there were obvious spiritual undulations coming from them. When they passed through the spiritual barrier, they would demonstrate their compatibility with the spiritual barrier before they managed to pass through. Impressive. Hua Yua was in awe. In terms of soul tool research and manufacturing, the Sun Moon Empire was indeed superior to the 3 empires of the original Douluo continent. This wasn't an extremely impressive piece of research, but the attention to detail was great. While this spiritual barrier didn't have any fighting use, it was still very practical. Since this was the case, these soul engineers must possess some kind of special soul tool on their bodies that could help them disperse the spiritual undulations. This meant that Hua Yua could sneak in with someone else if he possessed such a soul tool. That would help him avoid all the spiritual barriers. As he thought until here, Hua Yua started to take action. Under the surveillance of his spiritual detection, it was definitely not difficult for him to find a suitable soul engineer. Hua Yua quickly made his way around a few tents while continuing to use his imitation to conceal himself. Very soon, he found a member of the Soul Engineer Legion not far from the side of the military base. To ensure that he could get what he wanted, Hua Yua intentionally selected a Class 4 Soul Engineer. In Hua Yua's eyes, a Class 4 Soul Engineer was an easy target. He crept closer and closer. Given his imitation, he wouldn't be discovered even if he got right up to his opponent's back. Hua Yua controlled his body temperature very well through a combination of his ice-type soul power and imitation. Very soon, he was behind that female Soul Engineer. He swiftly hacked at her neck with his palm. At the same time, he unleashed his spiritual interference domain and engulfed both him and the female Soul Engineer inside. When his palm hit her neck, he immediately discovered something amiss. A gentle yet resilient wave of soul power immediately rose. Following this, the female Soul Engineer's body shone with a streak of red light. The appearance of this red light was very sudden. However, the moment it appeared, a deafening alarm also immediately reverberated throughout the entire base. The red light wasn't sufficient to resist Hua Yua's right hand. The Class 4 Soul Engineer collapsed to the ground amidst the deafening alarm. What's going on? Not only does she have an automatic defensive soul tool on her body, but she also has an alarm-type soul tool with her. Hua Yua was shocked, but he didn't have time to hesitate anymore. He bent over and quickly picked the Soul Engineer up. He was going to flee before deciding on what to do. After being discovered by such a strong Soul Engineer Legion, there were many methods that could be used to detect his location. However, something else caught him by surprise again. When his hands touched the unconscious female Soul Engineer, another layer of red light shone from her body. Following this layer of red light seemed to cause more than 10 different beams of red light around them to shine at the same time too. Not only did this red light protect this female Soul Engineer, but it also engulfed a large area around her. It's a linked defensive soul tool. It can still work after she's struck unconscious. Hua Yua was depressed. I have to go. Otherwise I'll be in trouble. He couldn't be bothered with capturing her anymore. He quickly shut up and charged out like an arrow. He was about to collide with the red lights in front of him, but he snorted coldly and lifted his left hand before smacking it in front of him. A strong sense of chill was instantly unleashed. That sense of chill was very strong when it first appeared. However, it soon toned down. However, just as the temperature turned from extremely cold to normal, the red lights in front evidently became weaker. Hua Yua waved his hand and unleashed the destructive strength of his dark golden terror claws. He forced open a slit in the barrier that the red lights had formed before charging out and up towards the sky. Even though he could also be detected in the air, he had no choice but to do it now. This was because there were many oscillation detectors scanning in his direction right now. Furthermore, more red lights also shone within the Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion. Hua Yua was secretly counting his blessings. If he were any slower, the earlier linked defensive soul formation would have become stronger, and it would have become impossible for him to escape. He would have landed in the enemy's hands. No wonder it's the hand that protects the nation. This indeed an extremely strong Soul Engineer Legion. Hua Yua silently compared the evil tyrant Soul Engineer Legion to the Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion. He immediately felt that this Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion was even stronger than the evil tyrant Soul Engineer Legion. Perhaps the difference in their overall fighting strength wasn't very obvious. However, the Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion was evidently better in terms of the details. As he thought, Hua Yua immediately flew into the sky. Even if he was discovered, he couldn't make this trip for nothing. The oscillation detectors below were scanning everywhere, including the sky. Hua Yua wove and turned in the sky with the help of his spiritual detection, avoiding detection by his enemy. His motive was simple. He at least had to destroy the batch of aerial surveillance soul tools in the air and cause some damage to the Sun Moon Empire. Furthermore, it would make it more convenient for him in the future if he wanted to spy on this Soul Engineer Legion. detection. However, his expression suddenly changed before he could fly to the altitude of the aerial surveillance cell tools. As he extended his spiritual detection upward to find out the exact location of those aerial surveillance cell tools, they quickly shifted and got into a very weird formation. Shit. Before he even had time to be shocked, Hua Yua reacted without any hesitation. He continued flying upwards, but in addition, he also burst out in a diagonal direction at full speed. Indeed, the moment he moved, a huge invisible web from the sky fell. This huge web was made from hundreds of aerial surveillance cell tools. They unleashed soul power undulations that came from oscillation detectors. The soul power unleashed wasn't strong, but it came in streaks and was very dense. When the web fell from the sky, it covered almost the entire sky above the military base. The reason why Hua Yua felt that things were amiss earlier was because the aerial surveillance cell tools had fallen from an altitude of 1,000 meters to 500 meters. Something had to be going on if they all fell collectively. This was why he had reacted immediately, and he was right. These aerial surveillance cell tools all contained the ability of oscillation detection, and they bore down as a huge web. No matter how powerful Hua Yua was, he couldn't possibly avoid them all. The undulations couldn't cause him any harm, but Hua Yua soon felt his skin numbing. Without a doubt, he had been locked on. Streaks and streaks of intense red light shone below. Following this, more than 50 beams of piercing red light rose into the sky and shot straight towards where Hua Yua was. These fiery red lights covered hundreds of square meters around him, with him at the center. There was no way he could avoid them. These were high-temperature scorching rays. They were at least class 5 soul tools. Such rays couldn't pose any harm to Hua Yua, but they were definitely the most rapid attack the Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion could unleash in the short term. Their aim was also very simple. They wanted to stall Hua Yua before deploying other attacks against him. As these scorching rays shot towards him, more than 10 figures had already risen from the base into the attack. From their auras, it was evident that they were at least class 7 soul engineers. One of them was even a class 9 soul engineer. They were all flying towards Hua Yua at the quickest possible speed. Damn it. They're too ruthless. Hua Yua was a little depressed right now. However, his greatest potential was always unleashed whenever he was facing danger. A layer of icy jade glow emanated from his body. His 7 soul rings shone brightly. If the soul engineers from the Sun Moon Empire could see these 7 soul rings clearly, they would certainly be astonished. There was 1 red and 4 orange gold, followed by another 2 red soul rings. These were the 7 soul rings that Hua Yua possessed right now. He controlled his snowy dance of ultimate ice and unleashed it within a small region. All the scorching rays turned to nothing when they entered this region. The beams of scorching red light only added large patches of mist in the sky and didn't serve to stop Hua Yua at all. Hua Yua turned into a beam of flowing light and flew downwards diagonally. Right now, he had already been locked on by oscillation detectors. His highest priority was to charge his way out from the region covered by those oscillation detectors. Otherwise, even if he had wings, he wouldn't be able to fly out of the grasp of the enemy's top-ranked soul engineers. As he completely unleashed his soul power, his eye of destiny opened. His soul core revolved quickly, and immense spiritual power shot out from his head. His spiritual power was very strong. After it appeared, it immediately turned into a spiritual windstorm in the sky. Spiritual blast. Hua Yua's spiritual blast basically engulfed the entire area, spanning a diameter of 500 meters. It wasn't targeted at any soul master, but at the oscillation detectors in the air. Spiritual power could generate undulations too. Under the effect of his spiritual blast, all the undulations within this region immediately went haywire. Hua Yua knew that he couldn't immediately charge out from the engulfment of the huge web. Those aerial surveillance soul tools were chasing after him based on the direction he was escaping in, with the soul engineers below him to stall him. How could he successfully escape? This was why he had to disrupt the enemy's knowledge of his exact position. At least he had some free room to move about within this region now. Indeed, the moment he unleashed his spiritual blast, the second round of attacks that was supposed to come towards him from the ground was silenced. An area 500 meters in diameter was rather large. Hua Yua needed to use this limited amount of time he had. His body was still positioned diagonally downwards from earlier. He had already quickly put a flying type soul tool on his back. After stabilizing his body in the air, he immediately burst up like a shell and shot straight upwards. Go down. The bottom was completely covered. There was an elite force of soul engineers on the ground, and there were even aerial surveillance soul tools that formed a huge web in the sky. Hua Yua was truly trapped. The only escape route was up. It was only by breaking free from the web that he stood a chance of escaping. Furthermore, the attacks that came from below would also weaken as they moved progressively farther through the air. Hua Yua was a class 7 soul engineer himself. He still possessed a deep understanding of soul tools. This was why the only escape route was above. The aerial surveillance soul tools were roughly at an altitude of 500 meters. Under the influence of his spiritual blast, Hua Yua wasn't able to carry out any detection in the region that he was in. However, he unleashed his spiritual interference as he charged up. Even though his spiritual interference wasn't as effective as his spiritual blast, it still had some confusion effects under the influence of his earlier spiritual blast. After rising a few hundred meters into the sky, he was finally discovered again. However, his exact position wasn't exposed, even though one could roughly gauge where he was, because of his spiritual interference. Right now, he was very calm. He had faced more perilous situations on many other occasions. He knew that he needed to remain calm in a situation like this. It was only by remaining calm that he could increase his chances of survival. He continued to unleash his full strength and didn't even look at the soul engineers that were pursuing him. Ordinary soul tool attacks couldn't harm him at all. If advanced tier soul tools couldn't lock onto him, their strength was also limited. After all, there were very limited soul tools like the Death God that could unleash area attacks with such great and terrifying destructiveness. The Sun Moon Empire had evidently discovered his intentions. The aerial surveillance soul tools in the sky started to rise higher and higher. Hua Yua wouldn't give them such an opportunity. At this moment, he was only a few hundred meters away from these aerial surveillance soul tools. As he flew up, he was already putting another type of soul tool on his back. Light started to shine brightly, and Hua Yua accelerated amidst strong soul power undulations. During this process of acceleration, he curled his body up to the point where he resembled a cannon shell. Not far from him, the soul engineers were shocked as they pursued him. Is that a soul thruster? However, this soul thruster that this person is using is a little too overpowered. Can his body withstand such strong forces? They didn't know that Hua Yua had already unleashed his Ice Empress armor to protect himself as he used his soul thruster. Furthermore, he was also very strong, comparable to a title Douluo. Even though it was still a little overwhelming, it wasn't as intense as the soul engineers were predicting. Hua Yua quickly closed the gap. His eyes flashed with cold light, and he stomped with his right leg. Following this, the star Anise mysterious ice grass surfaced from behind his back. It revealed an icy blue halo which spread from Hua Yua's body. After this, something shocking appeared. The temperature high up in the sky was naturally lower than on the ground. When that halo spread, all the water vapor and ice elements started to gather in Hua Yua's direction at an alarming speed. This was one of the 2 soul skills that the star Anise mysterious ice grass had conferred to Hua Yua through that right leg bone. Star Anise ice coagulation. It was specially used to form ice elements. Even though it was just an auxiliary type soul skill, it was important to note that the star Anise mysterious ice grass was a 100,000-year soul beast. This meant that the soul bone that it gave Hua Yua was also a 100,000-year soul bone. As the ice elements in the air formed, the aerial surveillance soul tools that were quickly rising into the air were affected by the temperature and ice elements. They rose slower and slower as the temperature of the air fell significantly. Following this, Hua Yua's right leg suddenly lit up with blinding, icy blue light. The projection of the star Anise mysterious ice grass also ballooned significantly behind Hua Yua. After this, it turned into countless icy blue light projections that scattered all around before disappearing. In the air, ice spikes that were several meters long started to appear out of nowhere. They looked very astonishing from afar. It was as if a huge ice flower had formed at that instant. This ice flower covered a region that spanned close to 1,000 meters in diameter. As the region that it covered was extremely huge, the soul engineers that were pursuing Hua Yua subconsciously slowed down, and their expressions all changed. When soul masters cultivated and added soul rings, they would generally add a domain type soul skill. Under certain special conditions, domain type soul skills could be very useful. However, this domain type soul skill was something that the soul engineers from the Sun Moon Empire were seeing for the first time in their lives. How ridiculous was it that it covered 1,000 meters? That was a full kilometer. Ice spikes filled that region completely. Such a domain type attack was something they could hardly imagine. It could even rival some deadly soul tools. Huo disappeared as the ice flower bloomed in the sky. However, those aerial surveillance soul tools faced a different fate. The thick ice spikes ruthlessly penetrated the metal outer shells of those soul tools. Piercing booms and scratching sounds started to resonate through the air. Even though not all the aerial surveillance soul tools had been engulfed, most of them were gathered here, as they were trying to capture Huo. More than 60% of the aerial surveillance soul tools were destroyed just like that. The earlier blockade naturally ceased to exist. How could Huo give up such a fantastic opportunity? He quickly changed directions and flew diagonally upwards to a greater altitude. Star Anise, I didn't expect this. This soul bone that you've given me is actually so powerful. Huo complimented as he flew. The earlier attack had drained more than 30% of his soul power. However, Huo was well aware that he couldn't possibly inflict such great damage if he purely used 30% of his soul power to attack. The earlier attack was completely reliant on the Star Anise mysterious ice grass help. The Star Anise gave Huo 2 soul rings and 1 soul bone. Originally, Huo didn't put too much hope in it. At some point, he had even forgotten the 2 soul skills that came with his right leg bone. After all, he already had the Sky Dream Ice Worm, Ice Empress, and Snow Empress. Any one of them was much stronger than the ice grass. However, Huo had gradually grown to understand the true meaning of the origin of ice after the Snow Empress guidance. At times, power wasn't everything. The best thing was something that suited one the most. His earlier attack was actually the combined effect of 3 soul skills. Among the 2 soul rings that the ice grass gave Huo, the 6th soul ring carried a soul skill called Ultimate Ice Enhancement. It helped Huo to greatly increase the strength of his Ultimate Ice. 100,000-year soul rings generally came with 2 soul skills, but the ice grass was a plant-type soul beast. It had fewer innate soul skills compared to most ordinary animal-type soul beasts. There were also 2 soul skills in its right leg bone. This was why it didn't have extra soul skills to confer to Huo. The other 2 soul skills that took effect earlier came from the right leg bone. One of them was called Star Anise Ice Coagulation. This soul skill was very effective in tandem with Ultimate Ice Enhancement. It was also an important reason why Huo's later strike was able to cover such a huge area. As for the ice spikes that had appeared, they came from the other soul skill of the right leg bone, called the Star Anise Omnithrust. One attack was enough. More than 60% of the Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion's aerial surveillance soul tools had been destroyed. Huo felt great. The grim look on his face when he was pursued earlier had vanished completely. Without oscillation detectors locking onto him and with his imitation protecting him, detecting him would be extremely difficult. The soul engineers below tried to use 2 rounds of domain type attacks, to no avail. Eventually, they had no choice but to retreat back to their base. Huo was very pleased with how he had reacted to the situation. As he flew towards Dragon City, he silently thought to himself, if the earlier fight was on the ground, or if those people chasing me were a little closer, I could have directly used my ice explosion technique after my Star Anise Omnithrust. They'd have been completely blown apart. What if I used this combination on the Sun Moon Empire's military base? I should be able to cause quite a lot of damage to them. All this while, Huo hadn't used any direct domain type attacks. After trying it this time, he was rewarded with an unexpected result. Huo escaped in delight, but the atmosphere in the Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion felt extremely repressed. He wouldn't have imagined that the Dark Red Commander's tent that he had tried to sneak into earlier actually had the Empress of the Sun Moon Empire inside. She was his former classmate and friend who was once under Sun Wen's guidance in the aspect of soul tool production. Juzi looked very gloomy as she sat in the main seat in the commander's tent, decked in fiery red armor. Ever since she came to the Heavenly Soul Empire, she had never been on such a big losing end before. When she heard that more than 60% of the aerial surveillance soul tools had been destroyed, she stood up furiously and broke a glass cup that she normally liked very much. There were many senior soul engineers of the Legion standing below her. However, they were all very petrified now. They lowered their heads and didn't dare to utter a sound at all. Juzi tried to suppress the fury in her heart and asked, "Can someone tell me what's going on?" A lady who was wearing the same red armor and who appeared to be about 40 years old stepped forward and said, "Commander, there seems to only be one enemy. However, this enemy is very strong. Be more specific." Juzi said coldly, "Yes, this enemy should have been here to carry out surveillance. He was able to conceal himself using his own abilities or through a soul tool. After he entered our base, he seemed to be intending to carry out surveillance on this tent. After that, he attacked one of our soul engineers, triggering our linked soul tool. We immediately surrounded and attacked him. However, he was very sly, and his abilities were also very strong. He managed to break free from our initial encirclement and tried to escape by flying higher. To more accurately determine his position, we lowered our line of aerial surveillance soul tools and attempted to use an oscillation detection web to discover his exact position. Very soon, we pinpointed his location. As she spoke until here, she paused for a moment before saying with some difficulty, "We were about to succeed." However, he suddenly unleashed some kind of soul skill that stopped us from locking onto his position. After that, he rose into the sky at an alarming speed. As we pursued him, he reached the same altitude as our aerial surveillance soul tools. Following that, he unleashed an ice-type soul skill that covered a region spanning 1,000 meters in diameter. The entire sky was filled with ice spikes, destroying many of our aerial surveillance soul tools. Without the web, he concealed himself once again. We tried to use domain-type attacks on him, but they were useless. He managed to escape. Juzi looked very serious after hearing this report. She furrowed her brow and paced up and down in the tent. Concealment. Yet another concealment. At the Mingdo mountain range, it was also because of a fellow who managed to carry out surveillance and used some unknown method to teleport so many titled Douluo in that it caused our defense to be overwhelmed. Eventually, we were trapped on the losing end. Don't tell me it's the same person. Or have the Douluo Heavenly Soul Empires found a method of creating soul tools that can help with concealment? As she spoke until here, Juzi paused for a moment before revealing a pensive look on her face. The Mingdo mountain range's failed defense actually had a great impact on the Sun Moon Empire's overall situation in this war. Given the high status of the death god Douluo Yishishui, no one dared to question her at all. Yishishui didn't reveal any details of the fight. She only mentioned that the Douluo Empire had a soul master who was very adept at concealment that used a special method to sneak into the Mingdo mountain range. Furthermore, this soul master brought in many titled Douluo and caused significant damage to the defense line at the mountain range. To prevent damage of the death god, she chose to retreat. This answer was extremely ambiguous to Juzi and greatly affected her judgment. However, while she was the empress, her position in the empire was nothing compared to Yishishui. As a result, she couldn't do anything even though she was doubtful. She could only plead to Shu Tianran to get to the bottom of things. Shu Tianran attempted to do so, but Yishishui didn't say anything else. As the emperor, he was also helpless. He couldn't afford to offend the Holy Ghost Church. The 2 ultimate Douluo and the Holy Ghost Church and many evil soul masters were the foundation of his plan to dominate the entire continent. This was why he couldn't do anything against the death god Douluo. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.